Well, where do I begin here? So, we have a baffling series of events that a few years ago, if someone would have talked about what's happening now, you'd have thought this was absolute madness. Donald Trump basically has control of America. This seems to be fairly certain now. And the reason I say it's quite easy to look at the situation. There's obviously Trump supporters going, oh, well, of course he's in control. He's a natural leader, blah, blah, blah. And there's other people going, no, no, it's really the shady ones behind him because obviously he's a clown, he's there, but he's a distraction away from the really nasty, insidious people that are basically shitting on the American public. But it seems to me that he is very firmly in control of the government, and we needn't look no further than the trade war for this. You know, Republicans traditionally are fairly low tariff in their attitudes because they know that they can produce goods very cheaply in America. They have access to quite a lot of slave labour. They can produce goods very, very cheaply. And they're a large market in themselves. They've got a lot of economic clout. They don't really need a protectionist strategy. It works against them, as George Bush Jr., George W. Bush, found to his cost. He tried, remember, putting tariffs on steel, I think at least, maybe aluminium as well. And what immediately happened is the EU slapped tariffs on oranges. Seems a bit strange, you might ask. Why did they do that? Where are lots of oranges produced? Florida. And it basically hit, in fact, George W. Bush basically himself said when he went to meet with someone at the EU, he says, why are you hurting my family? Because that's what it did. And it was like, well, so the steel tariffs, that issue went away. A year later, they were gone. And it was as simple as that. And the same thing will happen here, by the way. Obviously, there's a lot of retaliatory action going on, people put in, and the EU again being very clever. It's really annoying me as someone from the UK that were leaving the EU because they're really good negotiators. Even Donald Trump said himself, he said the EU are impossible to negotiate with, which when you're on the opposite side of the negotiating table basically means really good. And we're leaving that. We're terrible at negotiating. But anyway, never mind that. That's a moan for another day. So what they're doing is they're targeting the goods that are produced in the states where very senior Republicans hold office. But the problem is, it will hurt them personally, and they will go to Trump and say, "Hang on, look, can you not?" Apart from, as I say, it's not really a Republican ideal. They're more about free trade because they know America can win a free trade situation, but it won't work, will it? Because Trump does his own thing, and I think this sort of proves it. This sort of policy is dead against what most Republicans would want. But it's the only way Trump knows how to deal with anything. But you do notice that he's not really going hard on China with this trade war. He's going at his allies, the ones he met at the G7. The G7 meeting where he turned up late, left early, and in the interim just seemed to be sat there with his arms folded while everyone was sat around him going, what are you doing? What are you doing? And he's just going, like, oblivious to the whole thing. Angela Merkel, bless her. Oh my God, I think everyone wishes they had a leader like her, apart from Germany, because they've got one. Oh my goody aunt. So, but yeah, I mean, it just shows to me that, Trump is very definitely in charge because he says he can win a trade war. Now, I don't know. All I do know is this. If you're going to go full-blooded in a trade war like this and actually challenge the whole world, the only way you will win is if you import more than you export. Because if you, and America is a country that exports a lot, if you have a large number of goods being exported, well, those are the ones that get in tariffs on it. The only way you win is if the net balance is more stuff's coming in, so you sort of win overall. But as far as win can happen on a nationwide basis, maybe you can. Obviously, the problem is that many American businesses are going to go out of business because the ones that are being targeted are not going to be able to sell their goods on the world market. Some of them, if it's a company that produces certain goods and the rest of the company can keep going, it can weather the storm, okay. Obviously, the ones this is going to hit are the smaller companies. The smaller companies who can even be in trouble with significant changes in currency rates. Even that can snooker them. Obviously, and you can get hit both ways. If you're a company that imports raw materials in and then builds stuff and then exports the products out, you get hit both ways. And as I say, smaller companies are going to go under as a result of this. So this is certainly not going to help the small business person in America. It's not really going to help any business in America, really. I suppose apart from one that potentially produces everything within the United States and sells to the United States. They'd sort of largely get away with it. Might even gain, as I say, if they produce products that not necessarily as good or as cheap, but might gain from the imports. But yeah. But on to the other news, of course, I mean, I think he's probably gained America, not necessarily the American people. Although there was another thing there, the Supreme Court has basically banned people voting Democrat this week, hasn't it? It's basically banned people voting Democrat because there's a bit of a thing in American states, and some American states, Ohio was the one that was really following this to the letter, where people register to vote, but then you can put all sorts of obstacles in the way, like complex forms, tests, things like that, to be able to register to vote. And then if they send you forms that say, are you still this person or something like that, and you don't return it, that after a certain amount of time they can remove you from the list. And this is hitting Democrat voters harder because obviously this hits people who are poor and poorly educated, and so in a situation where, in a very high turnout election, apparently, where Democrats are more likely to vote in record numbers because it's like, we need to change this now, as may well happen in this year's midterm elections in November, I believe they are, then obviously there's a load of people who are going to find themselves not registered to vote. It's a bit grim. It is a bit grim. But this is the problem when you have a Supreme Court that votes on constitutional matters that is hugely political. And at the moment, of course, there's 5 Republicans, 4 Democrats. And obviously anyone with any intelligence is going to be political. I understand this. But for them to be so openly political, and they always vote along these party lines, I mean, you can't imagine, our justice system is not great, but you cannot imagine judges voting along those lines in this country. Even in the House of Lords, which is made up essentially of politicians, there's an incredible amount of, on divisive issues, cooperation between people of different parties there. But anyway, there you go. And that's the equivalent, really. I mean, we have a Supreme Court of our own, of course, but on constitutional matters, you could argue the Lords is as good a buffer as any. People always point to the fact it's unelected, but much like the Supreme Court, which is not elected either, it's voted for by politicians, governments, basically, effectively elect the House of Lords. But in terms of the world's gone topsy-turvy, hasn't it, with Trump? Completely topsy-turvy. He's attacking Canada, which is the world's Mr. Clean. Everyone loves Canada. No one's got a bad thing. It's like the neighbours everyone would love to have. But Donald Trump has spat his dummy out, and the communique that was agreed for, because this is always what happens. People think that our world leaders go to these summits to talk to each other and to agree things. Nonsense. Could you imagine? You don't dare let politicians go off and decide things. What a nightmare. Can you imagine a world where politicians decide things? Oh, actually, we can now because we've got Donald Trump. But everyone else, the civil servants don't let them do that. So they work things out in advance. They know, obviously, talks go on, but they know what the conclusion is going to be. That's all agreed well in advance. They don't have to physically meet to agree things anyway. They haven't done for generations, but they certainly don't now. Communication is easy. So then you have the communique, which is agreed by everyone. The wording is agreed and it all goes out. And then Donald Trump, who agreed to it as well, spat his dummy out. And after he left, said, no, we're not authorising that. Because obviously he left early, so he left before it was sort of read out. But look at the situation. So he starts off at the summit saying, oh, we should let Putin back in. And everyone pointed out, well, hang on, the reason we kicked him out is because he invaded another country. Donald Trump's response to that seemed to be, yeah, that was ages ago. Yeah, but they're still there. Yeah, but that was ages ago. Yeah, and since then, they've poisoned people in other countries, on their soil. Yeah, but that was like weeks ago. What? And now, of course, he's gone off to North Korea. And this is the maddening thing. Someone was showing me some clips from Fox News. And we were no strangers to biased media in my country as well. Fox News. So it showed you clips of when Obama was talking about the fact he'd be happy to meet with Kim Jong Un and stuff like that. And they were labelling him as a traitor. How dare he meet with this dictator? And, he's selling his country out and all the rest of it without North Korea agreeing to loads and loads of demands. And actually, that was another funny thing. Someone clipped Fox News, a bit of a gaffe. It was hilarious. And it was talking about Donald Trump meeting with Kim Jong Un. And one of the reporters used the phrase, and when the two dictators meet in Singapore. They described their own president as a dictator. Anyway. So, yeah, but now Donald Trump's meeting them. Fox News are saying, oh, this is showing leadership, blah, blah, blah. And what has actually happened here? What has actually been agreed? So, Kim Jong Un, remember, all he wants is secure his country. He wants to basically rule his country like a monarch. That's all he wants, right? So he's agreed to give up nuclear weapons, okay, which might be a bit iffy anyway, but okay, we sort of think he's probably got them. Well, he's got some. He's going to agree to shut down his testing cave. Well, he blew that up in the last test. If he was going to do any more nuclear tests in a cave, he'd have to make a new one because he's blown the bloody thing up. So dismantling that completely beyond use is no difficult task at all. So he's agreed to those two things. And what has Donald Trump agreed to? He's agreed to stop the military exercises with South Korea. Now, okay, it could be argued that those military exercises weren't necessarily absolutely essential anyway. I don't know. I'm not a military strategist. I'm not going to comment on that. But the fact is, that's all North Korea have effectively wanted. All they've wanted throughout all these years is for the US to pull its military, scale its military back at least, out of the way, and to let them continue to enslave their own population. And Donald Trump's basically got, all these sanctions, bear in mind, were to do with that. They were to do with the warmongering nature of North Korea. Okay, that's a dodgy term because plenty of other countries, America and UK included, tend to warmonger a bit as well. But it was for that and for the terrible way he treats his own people. So now what we're basically saying is, oh yeah, we're fine with that. So what concession has he actually got from Kim Jong Un? He's got the concession that he's going to dismantle a nuclear testing area that he basically blew up already anyway. And he's got him to agree to denuclearization. Well, they didn't have nuclear weapons a few years ago anyway. He's built up the nuclear arsenal while Donald Trump's been president. I'm not saying it's his fault, but while he's been president, and now he's agreeing to dismantle it as long as basically America agrees to North Korea's demands, which is what he's done. And he's probably going to be miffed when no one gives him a Nobel Peace Prize. I can't believe it. So, and if America wants this, okay, fine, democratic people. But do the people of America really want America to make enemies of Canada and the European powers, and to make friends with Russia, who intend nothing but harm upon them, without, saying anything about Russia? Obviously all countries are invested in strengthening their own nation. That means at the expense of others, of course. But nonetheless, Russia and America are not traditionally allies. So he wants to make allies of Russia, make allies of North Korea, and enemies of the more traditional allies. Is that really what the people of America want? Because that's what's happening. That's what's already effectively happened. I mean, as people have said before, we live in interesting times. And it's like one of these things, I keep thinking to myself, I really wish I could fast forward 5 years to see how all this is going to pan out. But then part of me doesn't even want to see what it's going to be like in 1 year. The world is basically going to hell in a handbasket, isn't it? It's absolutely going mad. He's running scared from China. He tried the old trade war with China. That didn't really work out too well. So he's left that on a slow burner. Going for it against Canada and the EU, that won't work. The only one who's going to really suffer out of all this stuff, basically Britain will suffer, because as soon as we leave the EU, that's it. We've lost all of our negotiating stuff. And you notice on that photo as well, I almost used that photo here, with the European leaders around Donald Trump and the Japanese leader off to the side looking a bit bemused. And, you know, even though Theresa May was one of the ones around him, basically looking at me as if to say, what's up with you? Our own leader doesn't say anything, doesn't say book to a goose. Only ever criticises him when he slags off our country. Doesn't when he does anything else stupid. So, you know. But that's a topic for another video, really. So anyway, let me know what you think in the comments below. But it's just absolutely insane as far as I can say. I cannot even believe it. Even though the way Donald Trump is acting is entirely consistent with the way Donald Trump acts. It's not that I find his behaviour surprising. What I find is the continued behaviour of the very powers in America that are supposed to check the more extreme nature of the president's wishes. And they're doing nothing. And they're not doing nothing as I originally thought, because secretly behind the scenes they're getting what they want as well. It's because they don't feel that they can. I think he has beaten Congress and the Senate in a very real way. Brawn over brains.